Ritchie.
Thank you so much, Sherry, and for pulling us together and to the team. I want to redo the agenda just slightly because we now have Matthew hooked up to a phone and speaker system. So we'll be able to see Matthew, but we will hear him through. Matthew Asada is one of the wonderful, wonderful people I've met through the Expo process at the State Department. Matthew came to the Expo unit in the position of really having the responsibility for making what turned out to be one of our biggest and finest ever participations in the Expo, the one in Dubai. Matthew's really the person who made that happen. And I remember being in the room over in the office, the Expo office at State, when the word came through that certain of the pieces of the money puzzle, and we'll get into the puzzle perhaps, but the puzzle pieces fell together. It was suddenly clear, boom, it was going to happen. And I remember Matthew being so proud, so excited and saying, I'm getting on a plane tomorrow. Or he might have said today, that would have scared me, but maybe it was tomorrow, and down to Dubai. And he made an incredible leadership and an incredible example for what it will be in the future as we continue to build out how we do public diplomacy through the Expo and other mega events. He's right now a U.S. public diplomat in residence at University of Southern California Center for Public Diplomacy. Some of you might have seen his excellent articles, both on the Expo itself, but also very recently looking at some new initiatives, taking a picture at interesting things like having the World Cup in Doha and the Expo in Dubai, more or less at the same time. What's that saying about where we're going globally, and what are some of the things we should be thinking about? So Matthew's a thinker, a doer, a foreign service devotee since 2003, and a foreign service leader in many, many ways, and a really good friend. And I'm thrilled that he could be with us today. I'm sorry that it's going to be in this slightly complicated sound way, but you're going to be really, really glad and very excited to stay in touch with Matthew after we get his vision and his ideas and his passion here today. Matthew, I'm turning it over to you, and I'm going to hold this up to the microphone.
Great. Thanks, Mark. Just sound check. Can you hear me there in the room?
Oh, hold it. Hang on. Matthew, try it one more time.
Yep. Mark, can you hear me now?
Hold it. We've got the speaker on. Try it now.
Okay. Can you hear me? You guys
yes.
Hear me in the room?
We got it. Take it away.
Great. Well, thanks, Sherry and Mark, for that warm introduction. And hi, B and Nini there on the floor. It's so great to see everyone. And I know that, I'm sorry I'm not able to be with you guys in the room, but I'm tuning in here from the West Coast. And I just want to say hi, too, to those that are joining us virtually. I think I have some of my students from USC on the line, and maybe even a couple of youth ambassadors that were with us on that journey to Dubai. Sherry, you may have credited me with that phrase, the Olympics of public diplomacy, and it's something that I wrote about in my 2015 article. But in doing a little research and actually encountering someone here in San Francisco, it actually was a previous BIE president, Ted Allen, no longer with us. He was a British diplomat and a commissioner general, and he referred to the World's Fairs as the intellectual equivalent of the Olympics. So whether it's the intellectual equivalent or the Olympics of public diplomacy, I think we're both onto something, that this is, for us public diplomacy practitioners, a real space to excel. And I'm going to take you a little bit through this journey. And I talk about the World's Fair really as a journey, because it's only because of those connections, of the people that we encountered along the way, that we're able to put together, again, this pavilion. But it's about that experience. If I can, I'll try to do this. Again, hopefully we can make this work. I can share you the slides that I've put together here on the screen. 1 second. Let me bring those up. And if you guys can just let me know that you're seeing that in the room. it looks like.
Yes.
I can see it in the back. Okay, so I'm going to run through this with you guys. And again, it's an amazing the panel you put together, Mark. I mean, I think all of us together have probably worked on 5 expos, if not more. I'm just thinking about all the experience and wisdom that's on the screen. But I want to talk and start with where we are today. And I think this is actually really significant. Can you hear me?
Keep going.
Okay. Significant where we are today in Dubai, as just this week, Dubai and the UAE hosted the World's Fair COP28 on the site of Expo 2020. And here you can see the world leaders gathering, the vice president, Kamala Harris, and they transformed that entire site that had been built. On the left, Al Wasl, on the right, the US, what was the USA Pavilion, along with my deputy Nadia Ziadeh, into this global gathering. And I point this out because, actually, can you try to maybe mute your side on the sound? Or I don't know if that will work or not with how we're doing it, but I'm getting a little bit of echo. Okay, let me try. What we would not be able to have COP28 in Dubai had it not been for the physical legacy of Expo. But what I'm going to focus on a little bit in today's session is the intellectual capacity and the knowledge that was created by those professionals that were working this event. UAE was able to benefit from that new class of Emirati and expatriate professionals to actually host the world for COP28. As Mark mentioned, I recently published an inter-event comparison of FIFA 2022 and Expo 2020 that dives in to how these two countries, the UAE and Qatar, use this global mega event as part of their nation branding strategy. And this was historic. It was the first time that these events had ever been held in the Middle East, North Africa, or South Asia. And they were held in the same year, 2022, at a time when the rest of the world was shut, when the Winter Olympics in China, when the Summer Olympics in Japan had no spectators whatsoever. These two countries were able to welcome the world with in-person physical attendees. And I know that there's a lot of attention and focus on digital or virtual. As we're even seeing right now, nothing substitutes for that in-person experience. Just a little definition, global mega events, we usually talk about 3 events: the World's Fair, the Expo, regulated by the BIE, the Men's Soccer World Cup, regulated by FIFA, and the Summer Olympics, the International Olympic Committee. The Winter Olympics are not with the same number of attendees, not the same attention. So the 3 events here really are kind of the triad. And I think whenever we talk about the events, it's important to consider the perspective. Is it the organizer, the governing body, participant, spectator, or even a company or cultural organization? Again, you can see how close Dubai and Doha were. And the fact that they put this on for the first time, the synergies, the connectivity, and even right now, as Dubai is hosting COP28, Doha is hosting a horticultural exposition. Same time, same region. So this really lent itself to an intra-event comparison. And on the screen, you can see a couple of data points. The one I want to draw your attention to is Expo in-person attendance, 24 million during the 6 months. And here, the difference with FIFA, the World Cup, the broadcast attendance, 5 billion. The largest, most attended event being the Expo, the most watched event being the World Cup. And they both had a legacy. They both created new cities. Expo City, where COP is today, Lusail City, which will be the home of a new cultural and academic center there for Qatar. And they changed and left a legacy on the event itself. So Expo 2025, the next World's Fair, will have theme weeks, an innovation introduced by Dubai. And the next World Cup, 2026, here in the United States, with Mexico and Canada, has a high bar to reach with its cultural program that we saw in Doha. My journey to Doha actually started in Los Angeles. I went to a performance of the Los Angeles Dance Project in 2022 in October and learned that they would be part of a 2-week dance festival, bringing 100 dancers together, coinciding with the World Cup. Here's the troupe performing in front of the National Museum in Doha. And that really sparked my interests. I got a sense then that Doha was going to be much more than just the soccer. It really was going to be this cultural platform, as well as with a business development angle. And again, I had just left Dubai with our robust U.S. Youth Ambassador Pavilion, U.S. Youth Ambassador Program at the USA Pavilion earlier that year. Just a brief recap for the USA Pavilion. This was our theme, Life, Liberty, Pursuit of the Future. Expo 2020 had 10 theme weeks that we all leaned into to organize our business program and our cultural program, our speakers. And fortunately, we were able to do this as the first time the department directly contracted or managed a $60 million activity. But we still did this with our private sector partners. So we had sponsors, we had partners, and we had US government agencies that contributed to the event. A sense of the size and scale for those that haven't been: 2 times the size of Disneyland Resort, twice the daily attendance as Disney World, the most attended visitor park, theme park in the world. And our pavilion here, located in Al Forsan Park, with its iconic Falcon 9 replica rocket. Expo 2020 had a really rich cultural program. We complemented that with our partnership with Disney. And here, Disney didn't contribute anything, any dollars to the USA Pavilion, but they brought an incredible programming in-kind contribution. So Mickey and Minnie from Disneyland Paris, along with 60-person performance. On the right is National Geographic, UAE from above, doing the world premiere. They're at Expo 2020. Our partnerships with SpaceX, with the International Space Station, having one of the French astronauts that had actually ridden that SpaceX rocket stop by, and talking about the promotion of tourism with a CEO of American Hospitality Company, coinciding events with the Dubai Air Show, product launch for Tesla Model Y. This is how some of our partners and how the business community were able to use the platform. We worked with PepsiCo Foundation to launch the first Young Leaders program around a USA Pavilion. This one was from Morocco to Bangladesh, bringing entrepreneurs and forging connections across NEA and SCA. And of course, all of this was done with an eye to metrics. How could we explain to our congressional authorizers and our appropriators the extent of activity, the impact, the number of people that would experience America, 1.5 million. And again, this was when the entire world was shut. The department was not doing in-person programming. And we had a virtual presence as well, more than 300,000 people visiting our virtual USA pavilion in a navigable, interactive space, which still exists today. That was a little bit of the background of my 5-year journey on the US Pavilion at Expo 2020 Dubai. And I was fortunate that USC supported my trip out to the final week of the World Cup to see how that country had used this as part of their public diplomacy strategy. And again, whether it was in the stadium seeing a game or outside seeing how broadcasters had set up broadcasting stations in the Lusail Promenade. And what really struck home for me and made the absence of any comparative literature on this all the more striking was that the people that worked at Expo 2020 Dubai went on to work FIFA 2022, whether it was a venue manager at the US Pavilion in the top left, who went on to be a venue manager at FIFA 22, whether it was our agriculture attaché in the middle, who went on to stand up a USA pavilion on the Corniche in Doha, or the Commissioner General from the Switzerland pavilion, who went to stand up the Swiss house in Doha. People working these events would go from one to another, but neither academics nor journalists had written about these two events in comparison with one another. And so that was what I had worked on pretty much for the last year and presented in that publication. Again, coming back to the journey, my journey started in Los Angeles with our Qatari Consul General. The university was showing these games as they were taking place. But I really wanted to see how the city of Doha was responding in the souk or in the brand new city Lusail that they had stood up. And if you didn't know the city, when you looked at these pictures, you could almost imagine that it would be Doha or it would be Dubai because the elements were so similar. This promenade with the flags, this fan festival with the nightly concerts. Again, here's the pavilion, the US pavilion at Doha on the Corniche with all the other countries participating, 32 participating countries in the World Cup, 192 at the UAE at Expo 2020. The museums here, the LA Dance Project, they rolled out, well, they did multi-million-dollar renovations of the buildings, and then they had amazing exhibitions that tied into topics of interest and importance to Qatar. For instance, looking at Baghdad, looking at the plight of the Afghan refugees, looking at Al Jazeera as a broadcasting network. They were putting forward their policy through their public diplomacy interventions. But it wasn't just academic or intellectual. They also looked at fashion, a Valentino retrospective, a 3-artist, 150 model fashion show the last night before the World Cup final. And then even sessions on exploring Islam at the National Museum, or in the far right, bottom right, the exhibition on Afghan refugees. And I go into this a little bit in the publication that while both UAE and Qatar were hosting Afghan refugees after the fall of the government, it was only Qatar and Doha that really emphasized this in their public discourse. In the UAE, there was no equivalent exhibition. What's interesting to think about too for sponsors is that Hyundai is an official sponsor. so had a presence within the stadium grounds at the World Cup, but Starlink wasn't, and they just had a booth, a pop-up on the boulevard that ran to the stadium. So when companies, and I turn this to American companies for the 2026 World Cup, are thinking about how to participate, do you want to be on the grounds or do you want to do something in the city itself? And here are some of the lessons that we learned from Qatar and UAE's hosting of the event. They had a whole of country focus that they could do with this city state clarity. This new class of professionals, Qatari and Emirati, who are now in a position to work and host COP28 or the World Horticultural Exposition. And we expect to see more Manasa, Middle East, North Africa, South Asian countries adopting these mega events as part of their nation branding strategies. As the United States and other powers compete for the attention of the non-aligned world, and there's competition within the non-aligned world itself. And as I've already mentioned, two events are taking place right now in the GCC, the Gulf Cooperation Council countries, the Middle East. But it really is going to be the center of gravity for the next decade. You have the Qatar hosting the Asian Games. You have Riyadh, that was just announced as the host of the 2030 Expo, and then as well as the World Cup in 2034. This is what's coming, and it is going to be an expo, a new gold standard, if you will. Bigger, better, more participation than Expo 2020 Dubai. And this is where Saudi can benefit from the lessons learned and the experiences of UAE and Qatar hosting these events. So the expo will be in Riyadh, and the World Cup will be in several cities in Saudi Arabia. These are some of the rumored potential locations, but not yet confirmed. What does this mean for the United States and Canada and Mexico as we host the World Cup in 2026? Our last time doing this was in 1994. Well, it's 16 cities and 48 countries, almost more than 100 games. So it's going to take a coordination that has never been done by World Cup hosts before. And that's great. We'll get the soccer right. We'll get the security right. But the opportunity here for us as public diplomacy professionals is to think about everything outside the stadium, off the pitch. What kind of cultural and business program can we develop? We, being the countries, being the cities, the ministries, the civic organizations, the global ties, the global Minnesotas of the world, when this event happens. It's going to take place in our 250th anniversary. We're going to have to think about that North American travel. And it will be one of the things that helps to pave the way to LA 28. So I just wanted to provide you a little bit about the history and history-making events of Expo 2020 and FIFA 2022. And in the Q&A, I'm happy to answer any questions, whether it's about the US participation in 2020 or these two countries' experiences, or what we might expect here for Saudi Arabia moving forward. And with that, I turn it over back to you, Mark.
Thank you so much. So we're going to move ahead, and Matthew, you just hang on and we'll do our questions together. Got it? Matthew, if you can hear me, thank you so much for getting us this large framework. And I'm hoping that we'll take all of the questions at the end. So just let's stay in touch. And I'm not sure whose phone I was stealing there. We'll leave it here. Matthew, can you hear me okay? Just nod and say yes. You can hear the panel. Okay. So this was an excellent way to get us moving into this. And now we're going to have a first opportunity to hear a little bit behind the scenes. I mean, this has really been part of Nina Forini's task and her role at the State Department, backing up at least 3 of our Expo experiences in Asia, but also being deeply involved in the creation of and the operation of the new, not so new now, but the Expo unit, which really gave us something to stand on, especially as we've been developing bids, but also performances. Nini, thank you so much for joining us today, and take it away.
Thank you, Mark. I'm so glad to be here and with Matthew and B, fellow fans of Expo work. I can't believe I'm even saying that, but that is true. I won't be speaking for long, but I just wanted to give a bit of introduction on how I feel about Expos, given my experience. It occurred to me while I was watching Matthew's PowerPoint, how much of the work that is done to put up a U.S. pavilion is largely invisible. And there is so much work for every program, for every visitor that comes, for every company that was enticed to support us. All of that entails many, many, many hours of hard work. So, so given all that, challenge and difficulty, I feel then, as I feel now, that it is really important for the United States to show up at this World Expos. So I worked on Expos I like to call it pre-2017. Pre-2017, meaning, prior to the time we rejoined BIE. So while the challenges are numerous even now, just imagine what it was like when we weren't even a member of BIE. So there were many challenges. I won't go into the details, but I was in Japan for my first PD tour when Aichi was going on. So while I had no personal knowledge of what went on, I did see everybody running around. It looked like it was difficult, even watching from the sidelines. And then I was in the regional bureau in EAP during Shanghai. And as the desk officer for Korea, I was assigned my first job, though. So I was assigned, and I was extremely nervous about being assigned as the overall coordinator for the Korea Expo. So you can imagine. Hello. Okay. You can imagine that I really paid attention to what's going on in Shanghai, because at that point there were many, many complications, and many problems which I'm sure everybody's aware of. The lack of ability to raise money, the lack of ability to attract qualified partners, all of that. So um, I I paid attention so I could make the expo in Korea as successful as I could, given my very small role as a very junior person. But that said, I must say that the key to the success of Korea Expo is because we had a really, really committed senior leader behind that. That's Kurt Campbell, who is now returned to the State Department as the deputy secretary. So Kurt immediately took on the task because at that time, I think there was a bit of exhaustion among the even more senior leadership in trying to fundraise. So he went in 100%, and he and I just did the rounds, trying to raise money. So while it is good news that we've rejoined BIE, and I heard that we have asked for funds for the the upcoming expo in Japan. There is still a lot that needs to be done, I think, and this is my personal opinion, for to make U.S. participation a bit more easy. I'm sure B, who will tell you about some of her, experiences in Milan, will share some of her stories. But after Yosu, I also worked on another expo in Central Asia in Astana, and to be honest, every subsequent expo things became a little easier, mostly because all those bureaucratic steps were documented. So we would pass on, files from one person to the other, and so it would be like, oh, we need a memo to waive the restrictions on fundraising, et cetera. So, but I really could not believe when I first joined the EAP team to work on the Korea Expo that we did not have any federal funding for an expo. It seemed pretty, as a very junior officer at the time, I'm like, I must be misunderstanding this. And after talking to all my colleagues who are who are working on the tail end of Shanghai, I discovered it was true. So I really feel that without money, it's really very difficult because it's so easy to run afoul of the many, many legislation that or legal restrictions on how you do certain things and how you cannot commit ourselves, the timing of all the different contracts and agreements. It is all very, very complicated, and not being able to fundraise or to solicit, and it's very, very difficult. So I still can't believe that we were able to successfully join the Korea Expo and the Central Asia Expo without having incurred any debts or actually having money left over. So that's a lot of work went to that. But so despite the challenges, I feel that expos are a very important PD platform. As Matthew said earlier, we can do a lot now with technology through Zoom, but look at what happened. Um, but I truly feel that, as many of us here who's done PD work, whether you're in the State Department or outside, that in-person engagement is priceless. There is nothing that can replace that. And having an informal, fun opportunity to meet not only Americans, but other people from other countries really brings dividends to America. It's a really good way to tell America's story, which is, I'm for us, I mean, a lot of criticism has been, oh, because because of fundraising issues, our pavilion generally aren't the most technologically advanced, or the biggest, or has the best bells and whistles. But I will say, at least in the expos that I've been involved in, that the surveys all show that they really love our expo. So if they wanna laugh at our film in Shanghai, or we did a film again in Yosu out of necessity because we couldn't give them rides or other things. But the surveys show that people that visited our pavilion all enjoyed interacting with Americans there. And I think one of the crown jewels we have in our expo, in the US Expo experience, is meeting one of our Expo ambassadors. And I think they've changed the name of Expo ambassadors. But so over and over again, you'll hear thousands of people come through and said, I was so impressed. I talked to that young man or woman, and they could speak our language, and they were so interested in our country. That's amazing. And so in my last job, working with Anthony Pahigian, who's another individual who's very active in the State Department in the Expo scene, we now have made former Expo ambassadors US alumni, which means that they are alumni of US government exchanges. So, that's like the Fulbrighters, Peace Corps volunteers. So they are now also alumni. And what does that mean? That means that not only do they make an impression and engage with foreign groups, as an ambassador of goodwill, they're also very important force in PD engagement domestically, which is an area I think that, we really need to do a lot more. So they're going back to their hometowns and saying, oh my God, it's the most amazing. And as Matthew said, oftentimes people who work on expos, like me, like him, like B, we go on to do other expos. So these expo ambassadors, some of the ones that worked in the Expo Astana, I had recruited for Korea. So, and then they go back home and say, it's the best experience of my life, not the expo necessarily, but learning other languages, meeting people from other countries. And that's something we really need. So another thing I'd like to mention is the importance of public-private partnerships and how we should do better. So a lot of our expos are built on top of the shoulders of corporate sponsors, but there could be better ways of doing. We should. While we do have an expo, we have a public-private partnership office in the State Department. I think we need to do more in trying to bring in companies and nonprofits, and we have done that. I think we have improved the way we do that, and we should do more there. Because corporations want to be in expos. They want to have FaceTime with the public and show a lot of their corporate social responsibility projects are very attractive to the local audiences. So that is a very important thing. And then sustainability, I think we should do more in trying to figure out how to make, these this huge construction sort of, this property, this huge, they're talking double the size of Disneyland. And oftentimes we build these new facilities and we leave them. And I know that for Korea, we try to pack up our US Pavilion exhibits and try to move it, do it, bring it on the road. But unfortunately, there wasn't funding for it. And I know that Milan had some plans, the city of Milan had plans to use that area, but that is something I think that we need to look at more. So I will leave everyone with a story, even though it's not really Expo, but now that we are talking constantly about how United States can compete with China, Russia, other countries that may not share the same sort of values we have in how we reach out and engage people. And sometimes money is not everything. And I'm going to tell you a story about when I visited Uzbekistan when I was the director for the PD office for South and Central Asia. So I was taken to a visit to the University of Samarkand, and I was visiting universities in Uzbekistan that we assigned English language fellows to. And these are young, freshly graduated Americans who, go and teach English. And they're assigned many different things like write curriculum. It's whatever is needed in that location. So I was very surprised. I had not expected this, especially since many people had thought that we were really losing badly to the Chinese in Central Asia because they were pouring millions of dollars into all these universities. So I get to the University of Samarkand, and it just was almost embarrassing because everybody came out, the mayor, the university president, and they took me on a tour of the university. And interestingly enough, one of the first places we walked past is the entire floor that is, sort of their China center. It was shiny, gleaming. There must have been, dozens of computers and equipment. There was so much equipment in there. But interestingly, there was only a couple of people in there. So, I didn't really think much. I'm like, oh, they're showing me this probably because they want to ask for money or something, So I walked past that, and the final stop was our American corner. And it was tucked away somewhere, and it was brown wood paneling. And, they opened the door, and literally it was like busting at the seams with students, and they were all talking and excited. And then the president turned to me and say, oh, this is one of the most popular spots in the university. There was no equipment there. It was just books and students, and there were English language classes. And he said, we want more English language fellows. And he named by name the last 3 or 4 that we've assigned there. And he said, we want them here. They're amazing. And could you bring them all back? And so that is just to say that those face-to-face experiences, like with our Expo ambassadors, are valuable. They're the first thing they see, and then it's the last thing they remember, and they do bring that back home with them. And so expos are important because we get to meet people. They get to see America's story in person. So I love expos, and I hope that we figure it out as a country, because it's an important thing and we need to be there. We need to show up. Thank you. If you have any questions, you can ask it later.
Thank you, Nini, and thank you for your service to our country and for telling us those stories that remind us just how important this is. Beatrice Camp, or B, as I think most people call her, is the first person I met inside the State Department on my little journey to get the U.S. back into the BIE and then to get an expo in Minnesota. And B had been all over the world and served in Sweden and Hungary and all these different places. But she also had been responsible for our big pavilion in Shanghai. And this was the only real concrete thing that we could hang on to that say, okay, this is why we need to do this. And B was a person who kept that going and made that happen and made it such a big success. And one of my favorite local mayors that I get to work with almost every week ended up on the cover of the magazine about the Shanghai exhibit because she was a mayor and she became the head of the mayor. So it was wonderful for me to make a friendship in addition to a professional relationship. And one day B called me up and said, we have this intern here. She's really interesting. She wants to do something on Expo. Would I be interested in being somebody who was, a kind of outside person on her master's thesis? I didn't even ask what the topic was or anything because B was asking me, and I was Secretary of State, and I was thinking about this. Anyhow, this fantastic young woman who perhaps is watching from Romania, where she's in foreign service, Tamil Reza, called me up and said that she wanted to write her dissertation. I don't think she said it this way, but let me put it this way, that me and my colleagues were wrong, that if we thought just that the Secretary of State could sign a sheet of paper and that would put the U.S. back in the BIE, that wasn't true, that we were going to have to go through Congress. There was a heartbreaker. And Tamil was right. And she finally got us on the path and is the reason we made the choices we made that, in fact, were successful, because she got us to stop thinking that this was going to be something simple or easy or, just political or something like that, and to do the hard work of putting together. And the two people that took this Expo bill through Congress that everybody thinks, isn't that great? Well, it was Tom Emmer, who chose Karen Bass as a Democrat to go in front of the Congress and say, we need a unanimous vote on this thing that's been so controversial, we haven't even been able to touch it as a third rail. And so thank you, B, for bringing Tamil into our lives and our knowledge and our strategy. And thank you for all that you've done in helping us understand about those last 3 feet.
Thank you. I was going to say that, like Nini, I'm pre-2017, but now you've given me a connection. So I appreciate that. So my experience was with Shanghai and with Milan. And just for Shanghai, for most of the 7.3 million people who visited our pavilion during that 6 months, it was the first time to ever meet an American. it was their first encounter. And if anybody's come up with a better way to meet Chinese citizens, I'd like to hear it. And if we're talking about elites, then President PRC Hu Jintao came to visit the pavilion, and we scored very high with all of the leaders. National and provincial officials came. U.S. businesses also took great advantage of that, meeting the officials, meeting other businesses. So why should we care about a presence at World's Fairs? What are the benefits? Art trade show, theater of nationalism, techno-utopian fantasy land is one description. World's Fairs offer government to government, people to people, business to business, and expert to expert opportunities, as well as all the variations that this suggests. World's Fairs provide a relaxed setting for diplomacy. U.S. pavilions help American companies reach customers, foreign businesses, government officials. The AmChams in both Milan and Shanghai were very enthusiastic about our presence. Multilingual U.S. student ambassadors introduced visitors to the pavilion and to American youth and culture. Many students who served in recent expos have gone on to foreign service careers and related careers. Expos are an international showcase for architecture and design, one of the areas in which we have fallen short. The UK, which used British firms chosen by competition, won acclaim and design awards in both Shanghai and Milan. And let's not forget the cost of not participating, sitting on the sidelines while other countries are part of the great political, cultural, and educational exchanges going on at the Expo. We called Shanghai an Expo of necessity. We had to participate. My fellow panelists and I could fill many pages on all the obstacles, all the war stories that have hindered optimum involvement in World Expos for the last 50 years. But I think we'd all rather talk about the road ahead. Rather than face yet another too little, too late presence, the department needs to begin as early as possible. That means requiring the active engagement of the public diplomacy, economic, energy, and environmental bureaus at a minimum. We see it as a public diplomacy effort. It's not. It's much bigger than that, and we have to recruit all of those people, all of those offices, many of whom are reluctant and think it's something that public diplomacy does. A well-supported lead office needs to integrate programs and interests throughout the department, as well as other agencies, into a variety of Expo programs that support U.S. interests, policies, and businesses. I'd love to see a whole of department, a whole of government effort that recognizes the rich possibilities of participating in these intellectual Olympics, global events hosted by countries where we have major interests. To quote President Obama, if the United States isn't right smack in the middle of it, if we're not helping to set that agenda, it doesn't happen. People look to us for leadership. We have much to gain from our role in World Expos, and it's time to do it right. Thank you.
Amen. So we're have a time for questions. I want to make a small commercial about two things before, because I know some folks have to leave. One of them is that one aspect of the connection of Olympics and Expo that hasn't gotten much attention today, but out in the big world, it's the question of peace. And if you ever watched the Queen Victoria's speech on the TV series or read the early documents, this was about trying to do something about endless war. And it was about trying to promote fair and, I would say, friendly competition from day one, not just at the first one in 1851, but at the second one, which was in New York. I'm not sure why we don't talk about New York, but it was extremely important. And in both cases, sometimes they would talk about the arts of peace and all of this, but the Olympics' birthplace was several thousand years ago to try to stop the warring and try to establish that maybe competition on a friendly basis would be more conducive to a better society. And the same was true. There were 41 wars between England and France before 1851 is 0 cents. I don't know if it's linked, but let's say there is a connection of people knowing each other and respecting each other and thinking about each other as enemy or friend or possible business partner or whatever. And there's a stack of things that I brought over here that are the modern era of reprinting books is such a miracle. And you can now read what the founders of these institutions thought. And you can also read what folks like Horace Greeley, who were the main thought leaders who studied and examined these. And I put some examples of these out there. And also the African-American community was unhappy about being represented so poorly at 1893 in Chicago. And they said W.B. Du Bois with an incredible set of infographics about the state of African-Americans in America to Paris and made a huge impact on this discussion. And so there's some things over there that you can have. I also will make an ad for one thing, which is that there was a long process of getting the U.S. step by step back into the BIE. But once we were back in there, it was also important and necessary that the U.S. start engaging as if there was going to be interest here in this country. Yes, that's typically under the Commerce Department, but really it's all one big thing. And we got into the BIE on a kind of wild set of politics. And we got not necessarily the warmest welcome in that process. And we got difficult times in trying to make a bid to host the United States. And we even got a negative vote by the staff and the leadership and the executive board. And so a group of people from Minnesota went over to Paris and went door to door with the last 3 feet and spoke to nearly every ambassador or leading person who was going to be making a choice. And we said, we're going to challenge the BIE board and staff, not something you normally should be doing in the international arena, because we knew that if we were not able to engage in the bidding process from the US side, this idea would be dead. And these difficulties would just be difficulties forever. And we went into those meetings with 3 things that I would recommend to anybody, my friends in Houston or others. One is we met with everybody, absolutely everybody. And for most people, they had not been visited. They might have got a demarche or a fax, but we met with everybody. But the second thing is we presented 2 things that were really, really core to connecting as Minnesotans to those leaders, 3/4 of whom are from countries of very low income. At least 3/4 of the countries who are members of the BIE are from low income countries. We said the first thing was that our theme was the UN Sustainable Development Goals, and we were big believers in the UN, and we were big supporters of the UN, and we were making it about the SDGs to raise the visibility and awareness in the United States on the SDGs, and they thought that was great. But the second thing was, we said, you know, Minnesota, we had a governor, a young governor, and he went off to fight the Nazis and all that, but he got called to go be part of creating the United Nations. And we're very proud of that. And we gave everybody a little present. I have just enough, I think, for everybody in the room. But we said to them, we think this is important for the US to be part of this because we were there at the founding, at the creation of the UN. And this is not something that necessarily is the message of our national government. And we were able to say out loud to enough people that on the floor of the BIE, when you don't really challenge staff and board very often, at least one person, a very distinguished woman who's a leader from an African country, got up and sort of out of sync and not necessarily what you're supposed to do, said, I'm voting for Minnesota and here's why. And they gavelled her down, but she made the point that we were there. We were there. And we talked to all of the people in several languages about why this was important. And we won that vote by 1. Our friends from Dubai sent up a person. They were trying to organize an expo, but they took time and sent somebody up who came in and supported us. Our friend from Africa, who was so influential, was super important in moving people. And so having the last 3 feet not get lost in the discussion. The face-to-face direct thing is so important to making it possible to keep moving forward, keep moving. The morning after we lost our second round, you know, these things take a long time, a little bit like Super Bowl. You got to keep at it. We got kind of a love letter to Minnesota from somebody in part of the other worlds of Expos, of horticulture, saying, God, we've been watching you guys for a decade. We love your passion. We love your theme. You know, would you consider pivoting and being part of this other part? And so we know that it is that connection that moves things. And the main connection this time for us was definitely through our diaspora. I have in the back about 7 or 8 copies of a little directory of how the diaspora of Minnesota mobilized themselves, especially from Africa. You know, we got 19 votes, 16 from Africa, the US, Italy, and Korea. And so if you take your diaspora that's part of this amazing country and that diaspora becomes a voice to home countries, it's shocking how effective that can be. And as the world becomes more affected by climate and climate dislocation, the United States is a place that is welcoming. Minnesota in particular, which is the place I know best, is very welcoming. But also as we as a nation and other nations, Korea, Japan, you name it, needing younger people, needing new energy, we are clearly a place that knows how to integrate and become part of a bigger whole. Out of many, one, Expos are one of the ways that we can do it. And the public diplomacy team has kept alive this idea of Expos, and there are people everywhere that want to figure out how to move it forward. And on part 2 of this discussion, a few months out, we can get into the nitty-gritty. Let's move right into questions. We have Matthew still on the line, and I need some instruction, I think, a little bit for questions to Matthew, and to Nini, and to B.
We only have 5 minutes for questions, so Gabby, bring one from online right away, and we'll work with that. And we may be able to get some of the questions and get your answers and put that in.
Great.
Put them out by email just to save some time. I see Scott has a question. Scott, would you come up and very quickly introduce yourself? Microphone. Yeah, please. Okay. And then Gabby, if you'll do the first one after that. So we'll at least get a couple in, one from our current audience. Go ahead, Scott. Microphone. Paul is here.
Okay, now it's working. My name's Scott Wayne, and I have a tourism development consultancy. So cultural diplomacy, public diplomacy are very important. You have all emphasized the important role of public diplomacy internationally and the important role for the US. Nini touched on the role of the ambassadors in the US, the domestic role. And I was just wondering if you could comment further on that role and the special importance of that role, particularly considering the coverage that we've just been showered with over this weekend from New York Times, Washington Post, Atlantic, about what we might be facing with the next presidency. Thanks.
Just very quickly, I think that it's really important that that we're actually where we are wanting to engage. So in difficult places like China, we're still trying, even though it's not, even if it's sometimes difficult for our people on the ground. But it's just very simple. These are regular Americans. As B said, it helps people realize that we have more in common than there is difference, and they bring it back to their towns and cities, and it does pay dividend in terms of jobs, of industry. We bring, in learning about languages and cultures, they go back to their cities, and they explain that, in learning a language, I could get a job. So there are many, many ways that it can tie into domestic economies, and during elections, a lot of talk is about economy, and there's nothing better than exchanges. It happens every day.
No, I think that's, thank you.
Okay, I'm gonna ask online.
Okay, and then Paul.
And then Paul, yeah.
Yep, perfect.
Okay. So we have one that's meant for all the panelists. Is the Department of State collecting and structuring knowledge base on the experience of Expo professionals like today's panelists?
Matthew, take it to
I can try to handle that. Do you guys hear me?
Yes.
Give me a thumbs up in the audience.
Yes.
Great. Well, I think this is a first great step to assemble that body of knowledge. And one of the things that we did back in 2017, Mark, you might remember, was with Foreign Service Institute to do a lessons learned case study about the Expo 2023 campaign. I don't think similar things have been done for Expo 2027. And we do not yet have the official Commissioner General's report for Expo 2020 Dubai sent to Congress or up on our website. But getting those required documents out, getting those discretionary case studies done, I think that's a good way of capturing the knowledge. And one thing I'll put out there that, again, is not department policy, but, you know, how, I think it was Michael, your question here about how do we get the knowledge from the outside, Michael Schneider. And as much as we may, there are restrictions on how we do this, regulations rather, on advisory panels, advisory committees, maybe there is an opportunity. Either we use the State Department's Foreign Policy Board, or we create something that is interagency, public-private, and a standing advisory committee that provides input into this. Again, not U.S. government policy right now, but just a thought that I would put out there.
Just one thing to add, I'd love to see the National Museum of Diplomacy have an exhibit on Expos. It'll be the last question, unfortunately, but we'll find a way to take some of the others.
So it's a pleasure to meet one of my heroes, Mark Ritchie. So my name is Paul Foldy, and I had the pleasure of working for Senator Richard Lugar on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee for many years. And I got to go to the Shanghai Expo, and I wrote about it in a report emphasizing the need for greater public diplomacy engagement as part of the Expo process. And so I just can't but reinforce everything that you all have said here today. And Mark reached out to me at one point when he was trying to get the United States back into the BIE. And I will just have to be honest, I wasn't the most positive voice on the likelihood of that. So the fact that you achieved—
You weren't the most negative either.
The fact that you achieved this and have continued to do this, it is, you are my hero. Congratulations to you all. But if you could just give us a quick update on sort of the congressional support or challenges that you're encountering on this, I just think it would be great to hear whom we should be reaching out to on the Hill to continue to emphasize the need for continued congressional engagement on this as a public diplomacy platform. In addition to using the Olympics analogy, which I think is brilliant, to me, a U.S. public expo pavilion is also similar to a peaceful aircraft carrier that sits somewhere for 6 months as well. So you can pick your analogy however you want. But again, congratulations to the panel. I'm just thrilled to be here to see you all in action, and kudos.
I could go on, but when somebody told me, maybe, I can't remember, that Paul had written this report that said out loud that while some people say nobody wants to do these, the whole world does, by the way. And when somebody said nobody in the U.S. wants to do this, said, oh yeah, by the way, San Francisco, Houston, and Minneapolis or Minnesota. And this was 2009, 2011, February of 2011. So Paul's role in this is incredibly important. And let me just say something quick about there's sort of two pieces of this. One was, it was a lot of monkey business, but we did get 20 million set for Osaka specifically, but we didn't get the handcuffs off, which is the language we all kind of use for all the restrictions. And so the thing that, and I don't know exactly how everybody thinks about all of this, but let me say the Minnesota delegation remains extremely strong about this, all of it. And we had a really high moment there for a couple hours and then it went away. But as a practical matter, we have strong bipartisan support and we are cranking it up on a very specific thing, which is hosting in 2031 a horticulture expo. Minnesota's a good state for something like that. But we're interested in how to translate that interest that's bipartisan in that one corner of the world into something that then can be really taking the handcuffs off. And we actually have a couple strategies. Some of you know that Betty McCollum is very important in appropriations. That's very important. And so I'm starting to hear my really successful political colleagues yelling at me for talking out of school. So let me say this, that I would love to speak with anybody in the room here or any colleagues about some specifics, but we are very, very strong in our own bipartisan aspect of our own state. We keep this clear, and we'd like to figure out how we sort of make it inevitable that the handcuffs have to come off so that Minnesota can successfully have an expo in Minnesota. And there's a little line that says to have a pavilion in a domestic expo, it has to be specifically authorized by Congress. That's one of the many of the handcuffs. And we believe there's a large deal that could be cut if Minnesota's whole delegation pushes, including with our friends on appropriation. And I'd like to talk to you about that directly and get on it. Is that enough? Is that too much?
Thank you. Thank you, Mark, Matthew, Dee, and Nini. I'm Joel Fishman, president of the Public Diplomacy Council of America. There was much that was discussed today. Two things that I'll just quickly refer to. Nini mentioned crown jewels. That's indicative of what we have to offer with Expo, with this underappreciated, vastly underappreciated medium. And Bee mentioned too little, too late, which has dogged our planning for the last several decades. This is not going to be the last program that we have on this topic. There's too much coming up and it's too important. Let me offer a bunch of additional thank yous to our immediate past president, Sherry Mueller, and pardon me, and to Mark for organizing today's event, and to our tech hosts, Gabby Stahl, a Tom Tuck graduate fellow, and her predecessor, Claudia Del Pozo, who's been doing a lot of magic online, where they've been doing, they really deserve our applause for this workaround that they, I'm sorry, and also to Alexis Pozel, the IPD GC student assistant. Well, join us, a few things coming up. Join us on Monday, January 8th, which is not quite as far away as it sounds, for our next First Monday Forum, which will focus on sports diplomacy. And on Friday, I'm going to be working backward. On Friday, January 5th, for a special program USC is organizing on Russian and Chinese disinformation. Further details on both are forthcoming. And Gabby, where can we find those?
Those will be posted to the website.
Okay, on publicdiplomacy.org. On December 12th, Tuesday, December 12th, don't forget the Walter Roberts annual lecture. from 6 to 8 p.m. A light reception will begin at 5:15. The speaker will be the Icelandic ambassador to the U.S., and I'm going to mispronounce her name. I'm sorry. Begci is okay. Begci, okay. Ellert's daughter, and that will also be on our website. And then finally, a week from today, next Monday, it is not too late to sign up for PDCA's first end of the year in-person gathering at Decor. We will be having lunch together and briefing you on plans for the coming year. This is your chance to let us know your thoughts on what you expect from PDCA. Registration information, okay, again, is on the landing page of our website. If you can't find registration information, you're welcome to email me at president@publicdiplomacy.org. That's president@publicdiplomacy.org. Glad you could all be with us today. These programs are brought to you by the USC Annenberg Center on Communication Leadership and Policy, the GWU Institute for Public Diplomacy and Global Communication, and the Public Diplomacy Council of America. Hope to see you next Monday, December 11. Thank you, everyone.
Such a great thing.
Yes.
Oh.